How you doing, Mets fans? It's your boy Wardy. We're back at it with the latest Metropolitan segment here as we have to break down not only how the Mets faltered in their series finale of a matchup against the Colorado Rockies by a final score of 8-5, but we have a jam-packed late night Sunday night showing here at WardyNYM as it is officially the MLB draft, and we're going to break down everything that you guys and gals need to know about the Mets' 19th overall pick today. Two-way player just like Nolan McLean. Funny enough, it's his roommate coming out of, yes, Oklahoma State, none other than Carson Benge. In today's show, again, we're going to break down everything you need to know about Carson and his game. Ultimately, why did David Stearns and Chris Gross, the new Mets front office brass, make this decision? How is he already looking in this Mets farm system? Is he a top 10 prospect for them already? We're going to get into all that and then some, along with breaking down our further thoughts and getting into everything that transpired in the Mets series finale against the Rockies as they faltered today. What transpired in that matchup, innings 1 through 9, the key highlights, our biggest takeaways, and overall our biggest takeaways from the Mets first half this season as they roll into the All-Star break, a couple games above 500 and currently in a wild card spot. How you doing, everybody? First chiming in live on a replay. Happy to have you all in here. Thank you all so much. Again, greatly appreciate every single one of you. Billy Dottie already with the $10 holla. Thank you so much, Billy. Billy in the chat says, even with this incredible run we were on, there is still a major concern in our starting pitching and bullpen. We are way too inconsistent to not only make the playoffs, but go far in it. And I agree with you, Billy, and that's the whole beauty about getting Kodai Senga back, getting some internal options back to this bullpen post-All-Star break, and ultimately making some buying and selling decisions by the trade deadline. Rest assured, David Stearns is going to have his hands all involved in that front in regards to building to this bullpen, along with potentially selling an arm if need be to better the team for now and going forward. How you doing, Zach Flakerton, Kevin, Scott, Mr. Chicken, everybody first chiming in. Steve, great member as always. Al Good, going up in the chat, everybody that's been patiently waiting throughout the day. Daniel Caps, great member, happy to have you in here. Mike Norton, how you doing? Rebecca Allen, great member as always, everybody. Matthew, how you doing? If you guys are watching this on replay, as I'm sure many of you will, let me know your initial reactions in the comments down below to the latest draft pick for the Metropolitans, the first under the David Stearns and Chris Gross era, as they've acquired, again, two-way player from the Oklahoma City, not Oklahoma City, I'm thinking basketball here, Oklahoma State, that being, yes, Carson Benge. Continue to let me know your thoughts down below. As always, we're going to break down everything you need to know about him here in a second, folks. And also, as always, shout out our amazing sponsors on the channel at BetUS, America's #1 sportsbook. Check them out today by clicking the link down below in the description. That way, you too get a 125% bonus, and not your first, not your second, but your first 3 deposits for all your sports betting needs. And of course, so are MLB, the best fantasy baseball game out there. Check them out to sign up for free, draft your team, and enter weekly tournaments today, both with the unique links down below in the description. And thank you all so much in advance to each and every one of you for doing exactly that. Ethan says he loves the pick. Yeah, let's get the roll call first and foremost. A huge shout out to my great friend Jacob in the chat, who's been an awesome editor for me, helped spice up what we got the Carson stat line that we have down below for you. So shout out to you, Jacob. Thank you so much for that, my man. He says, wonder how the Mets will use Carson, but I'm really excited to see what he can be. As am I. I really like this pick a lot for the Mets, and this is now another year where the Metsies have landed essentially a two-way player, a guy that pitches and a guy that hits baseballs pretty darn hard at the pro level that we're about to see now as Benge is coming out of college, in which he had himself a fantastic final year there with Oklahoma. And again, we are going to break that down in a second, but first and foremost, I want to know, how does everybody feel about this draft selection for David Stearns and the Mets? Because bear in mind, heading into this draft class, as guys like Joe DeMayo of SNY, a good friend of the channel, great with his prospect knowledge as always, thoroughly broke down, the Mets have been hunting for a college bat in this year's draft. We saw for the first time ever the first 8 players drafted in this year's draft coming straight out of college versus having a mix of high school players as well. This is, again, a very college-first heavy first round for many teams, and then we saw the Washington Nationals pick the first high schooler, which was none other than, yes, Seaver Kane, a guy that I would have loved if he fell to the Mets. But I'm not complaining here for a guy in Carson who some people were surprised that the Mets were able to land here at number 19, according to rival scouts, and certainly like his hit tool, and potentially has far more as a batter than as a pitcher at the major league level, should he hopefully propel and find himself a major league player in the coming years here. But there was a lot of other prospects in the mix that could be rumored to land with the Mets here, and one of the biggest ones, of course, was none other than Vance Honeycutt. Honeycutt, who was a huge bat, a true boomer bust prospect that many believed in the first round this year, considering his floor is lower than some other batters that we see, including even a guy like Carson that I honestly feel that I'm going to break down here in a second, but the ceiling is higher than some of the best players that we currently see in this year's draft. And the reason for that is the clutch factor, but also the swing and miss. He has a big strike zone, that being in Honeycutt, and now he gets drafted by probably the best team imaginable to help develop his hit tools and help develop him along with other great young talents in their farm, and that is none other than the Baltimore Orioles. So I'm really glad that the O's landed him out of all teams in Major League Baseball. And now in the Mets, they don't land Vance Honeycutt because they have the utmost confidence in what Carson Benge can bring to them. And for those that don't know Chris Gross, let's take a step back here just for a second, everybody. Chris Gross is the new guy at the helm as the VP of Director of Amateur Scouting here for the New York Metropolitans. This is his first year in said position. Chris Gross was in that position with the Houston Astros for at least the past half decade. Throughout that span, the Astros have been the best team in Major League Baseball and churning out top prospect talent that were drafted and ultimately having them hit the MLB level. Who have been at the bottom of that list over the past half decade, a full decade? It has been, yes, the New York Metropolitans. The Mets have been horrendous on churning out top drafted talent into MLB regular players. The Mets, again, have had a lower turnout than any other team in Major League Baseball throughout that span. So why did Chris Gross go from the Houston Astros to David Stearns? Well, it certainly helps when you have David Stearns as your president of baseball operations. Stearns has a connection with Gross during their time both with the Houston Astros. For those that aren't aware, David Stearns started his professional career in front offices and a significant role, that being as assistant GM for the Houston Astros in the early to mid 2010s before coming over to the Milwaukee Brewers as their GM, then turned Pobo. But that relationship certainly didn't hurt between Gross and Stearns, and now bringing in Chris Gross and then hiring Andy Green, who is going to be the head that we see currently of player development. This is exactly what you want for a Mets team that is trying to not only get the best out of their draft picks, but the Mets have done pretty well in their draft picks over the number of years that we've seen, especially over the past decade. What they have swung and missed on is their ability to properly develop these players that have solid hit tools, but maybe, have a little bit of a loopy swing, or maybe are solid with the contact, but they need more power. This is something that's going to be ever changing with the Mets and the new front office regime, and this is the true first test of Chris Gross, again, VP of Amateur Scouting there for the Metropolitans, and David Stearns at the helm as Pobo. Again, we have famously raved about the Mets drafts in recent years, but one thing that the Mets haven't done well has not only been their lack of successful player development with these top prospects in recent years, but also not holding on to said prospects. Jared Kelenic, a great example. Pete Armstrong, a great example. Now enter the latest lefty bat to be drafted by the Mets. Let's hope that this outfield prospect stays in Queens and is not parted with from now up until he's ultimately going to make his major league debut at some point. So the O's got Honey. Yes, they got Honeycutt. That is correct. And I'm not complaining there. If any team's going to get Honeycutt that wasn't the Mets, I'm really happy it was the Baltimore Orioles, the team I can continue to root for rightfully so. But continue to let me know your thoughts here on this pickup from the Mets, and let's get into what there is to know here about our guy and Carson Benge. Also, let me know, I'm pretty sure that's how you say his last name, but if I'm butchering it, please let me know in the chat. I won't be insulted. I'm not nearly as versed when it comes to college baseball prospects as I am with certain other prospects in the game, especially that are already drafted and have been playing the pros, even single double A, or let alone in other sports. I'm a lot more versed than I actually am with college baseball in particular. It's not my strongest suits. It's definitely something I'm trying to be better at, and I'm always happy to be breaking down these Mets draft picks because they give me great incentive to finally start learning up on these players I otherwise haven't had a great chance to talk about or really deep dive prior. I've watched Carson in the past, however, I really haven't had a chance to thoroughly deep dive him, and now we're going to do exactly that. And Carson Benge this past season, again, as a hitter, tremendous numbers in 61 games. We are looking at 18 home runs, 64 RBIs, 72 runs scored, at least 10 stolen bases, if not more, a 335 average, a 444 on-base percentage, and a 665 slug for over 1,000 OPS that we see for what's likely going to be the future corner outfielder for the New York Metropolitans. And yeah, you remember how I said how this guy plays both positions? He does. He's also a pitcher. He is another little Ohtani in the making, or at least that's what we deem currently, but that may change in the near future for the Mets, who like Carson more as a hitter than a pitcher, what really play reports indicate. However, the pitching statistics here aren't terrible whatsoever. 18 games, and we see 37 innings so far this past season for Carson Benge, a 3.16 ERA, a 1 flat whip, and we're looking at a 10.7 K per nine. So strong numbers there on the pitching end. And on the offensive end, what you're getting in someone in Carson Benge is, again, a plus arm there, especially if you play him in right field, where you want to use that power to your ability like he has done as a pitcher, which again makes him that much more enticing to play right field should he have the cannon of the arm that he finds himself having. Remember, this is Nolan McLean, fellow two-way player in the Mets prospect system, farm system rather, former roommate during their time with, yes, the Oklahoma State here. And crazy enough, yes, Cowboy Ohtani himself and Nolan McLean is no longer a two-way player. It was announced by Carson today himself when interviewed from the draft, when speaking on being drafted by the Mets, that yes, unfortunately, Cowboy Ohtani is no more. He's going to be strictly a pitcher that the Mets are going to work with going forward. McLean had his last at-bat that we saw back in June. That's the last that we will see him hit at the professional level, at least in the Mets organization, as the Mets continue to try to build up McLean as a true starter, an option for them to consider either as a starter or a reliever in the coming years for the Metropolitans here. But in the case of Carson Benge, he's in a completely different realm than someone like his good buddy in Cowboy Ohtani, or at least formerly Cowboy Ohtani, that being a Nolan McLean, because this is a bat-first Carson Benge that looks like he's going to profile best at the major league level as a corner outfielder, a guy that certainly can handle his own defensively for sure, and when it comes to his bat-to-ball skills, certainly has a better floor than a guy like Honeycutt, where you know that at bare minimum, you're hopefully going to be getting an MLB quality bat that can provide a solid sprinkle of anywhere from 15 to 25 plus home runs. The power is certainly there with Carson. You just have to find more of the consistency to really see how he transitions at the pro level. But to get a veteran bat like this that has had the success he's had thus far at the college level is key. Because what does this mean for the Mets? They're getting themselves an outfield prospect that is likely are going to hit the bigs sooner than what would have been the case with some other guys that we have seen in years past. This is not a prospect that I think is going to take 5 years to hit the bigs for the Mets. This is one that can certainly impact the Mets within the next couple years. That's an exciting prospect, no pun intended, to say here on Carson Benge. Another thing that certainly stands out about Carson and his abilities here with the Mets is he still wants to be a two-way player. He made point of emphasis with that in his recent interview that just happened over the past hour at the time of recording this. He said he's going to do obviously whatever the Mets deem is best for him in his career. However, he definitely has the idea to still be a two-way player, unlike his good buddy Nolan McLean, who has really hung him up now with being a two-way player at the professional level. Just Benge, okay. Pronounce Benge? No, just Benge. Just Benge, I'm pretty sure. I feel like that. It feels like that's the best way to say it. Is it not? Correct me if I'm wrong, though, everybody, as always. Cherno, thank you so much for the $2 holla. Cherno says, Carson's flowing uppercut swing looks like straws. I see that a little bit. Yep, and I love that donation. Thank you so much for that, Cherno. It means a lot. The initial reaction I had to this move by the Mets, he's a power bat with a strong arm. You know, when I think arm, I don't think of him as much. However, especially another corner outfielder hitting from the left side of the plate, this gives me sliver of, yes, Michael Conforto vibes. A guy that can come out there and give you 20 to 25 home runs every single season, hopefully at his best at the major league level. In the case of Carson, just being a very solid everyday player with a strong ability to get on base. That's another thing that the Mets have prided themselves on in recent years, and that will hold true. Just because the Mets have obviously been better with their power implementation and their lineup and what we were seeing now in the minor leagues versus what we've seen in years past, it doesn't change the fact that the Mets obviously love having guys that have a great ability to get on base and do it at a quality rate. That's certainly something that Carson has done over this past year that we see with a 335 average, a 444 OBP. That's what helps you be a first-round draft pick. In the case of Benge here, certainly being a top one as both a pitcher and a reliever. And when it comes to pitching, he's got some nasty stuff too. Plenty velo there on that fastball as well. It's Benge. Let's see, like vengeance, but with a B. So Carson Benge. Carson Benge sounds better, doesn't it? Carson Benge sounds like obviously Bane, which sounds cool, but Benge makes sense too. Always lose Wardy after about 10 minutes. That's okay, Thor. Well, I appreciate you chiming in for the 10 minutes that you found yourself in here. Thank you so much for that, as always. But to reel back into this one, folks, a little bit more on Carson and just kind of what he brings here to the Mets now. This is already, in my opinion, a top 10, certainly a top 10 to top 12 prospect in the farm. Right now, even with him, yes, I know that he's a little bit more advanced, a little bit older as a college bat. This is a guy that I think you could easily make the rightful argument, is in that top 5 range for sure. I guess the question, the case here of Carson, if he's in the top 5 to top 7 range, where would you guys personally have him? Because it's very subjective, and for me, I don't care all that much about prospect rankings for the Mets themselves. I care a lot about MLB-wide top 100 pipeline rankings. But when it comes to the Mets farm itself, who you kind of have 1 through 5, 1 through 7, 1 through 10 can be fairly interchangeable with the growth that we've seen in the case of a guy like Brandon Sproat, Jonathan this year on the pitching end especially, and then you're getting breakouts with someone, you know, who it's going to be. Nick Morabito has like very strong high contact outfield bat that we've seen with the Brooklyn Cyclones. Not that he's a high top prospect for the Mets, but he's slowly climbing his way up, and for good reason. But yeah, I'm really curious where you would have him, guys, on the rankings personally, because for me, I think I would have him right in that anywhere from 5 to 7 range. I'm curious where Joe DeMayo will have him, and as I'm sure Joe will talk about in the near future for the Mets pod or wherever he's going to find himself discussing things. But as we continue to break down everything that you guys need to know here on Carson, rest assured he is exactly the kind of profile of a hitter that the Mets were finding themselves looking for. They had a heavy point of emphasis, as we mentioned, to have not only a bat first player here. It's funny that they get a two-way guy, but is more bat first than with the pitching, even though he wants to stay two-way that we just mentioned here. But certainly a player that can come in and impact them a positive note within the next couple of years. Not a guy that you're going to have to wait, again, as I mentioned, 5 years for the likes of Carson Benge or Benge, however you want to call him. And I apologize if I mess things up on that front, everybody. Apologies, everybody. I was making sure that I had everything checked. It's an English surname. It's Benge. Okay. Never listened to a guy named Yeet in the chat says. That's 100% true. But all right, everybody. I don't really think there's much more that I want to touch on in regards to Carson outside of this is clearly a plus bat, a plus arm. When looking at his swing mechanics just from the eye test, it stands out that he has a little bit of a lot working. You know, he starts with his front foot planted pretty far back, and then he brings it all the way up for a little bit. I don't even know if I want to call it a tap. I want to see if they're going to show any of his swings in these little highlights I'm showing at the moment too. Yeah, right there. Yeah, no, he has a very smooth swing for sure, but I could definitely see the Mets maybe wanting to shorten up his mechanics ever so slightly. Also has a fairly wide stance when he goes to the plate. I've noticed that too. You know, definitely has a bit of a gap there from why am I getting tongue-tied so bad? From one leg to the other. And I'm curious to see how much his stance is going to stay the same versus change in his first year of pro ball, because while the Mets certainly have their pitching lab that we know, especially in Port St. Lucie, they are Florida and Port St. Lucie Mets and everything that they have going on with their newfound analytics and everyone that they've hired in recent years. Something too that's ever changing, but first year guys like Chris Gross, Andy Green, these will be the difference makers. So yeah, very curious to say the least how the Mets go about properly developing someone like him, who again is likely going to profile best at the major league level as a true corner outfielder more than anything else, far more than his likelihood of continuing to pitch for the sake of the Mets wanting to make sure they get complete focus out of him. Not that being a two-way player isn't amazing and very entertaining, because it is. However, the downsides are is you're also sacrificing your ability to fully focus on one thing over the other. And unless you are a true talent like Shohei Ohtani, it's still pretty much an anomaly of something that is done currently in Major League Baseball at that pro level, because it's just such a hard thing to do for a lot of guys, regardless on how lights out that they might be at the college level, like Nolan McLean, as we mentioned, very talented home run hitter and pitcher that we saw for Oklahoma State that the Mets drafted a year or two ago, and already a guy that is now throwing out the idea of being a two-way player because he realizes that his best chance to be a major league player is to not continue the bat, which he certainly did not look great at the professional level. Plenty power for sure, but there's a lot of pitchers in Major League Baseball currently, and in the minor leagues at AA and AAA that can absolutely rip nukes out of there, but are not going to be guys that are going to be consistent batters at the major league level. Even Paul Skeens was absolutely torching baseballs back in the day, pre-LSU especially. Like, the guy was tearing the cover off the ball, and now Paul Skeens has been one of the most dominant pitchers in all Major League Baseball since being called up. Let's see here in the chat what you guys got for me before we continue to break down everything about Carson Benge, and then we'll go further on in the show. And again, if I've had the name completely off the the rails. I apologize, folks. So we will definitely get it during this stream. Ethan, what are we going to get during this stream, my man? Hold on. Let me double check. Let's go up in the chat because you said we are. What they are. Let's go Mets and Knicks. I don't have a clue where he would rank. Know nothing about college baseball. That's fair, Steve. Yeah, I'm not sure what I missed there on the chat front, everybody, but I appreciate everyone that's been first chiming in live on a replay to the latest in Mets land as they go on a draft. Again, Carson Benge in the first round, a two-way player that would like to stay two-way, however, is willing to be that one-dimensional player if the Mets need him to be. And that very well may happen with his development, and we will find that out as he continues to really propel now, starting off that we're going to see in the FCL and work from there, really starting this year. So that's an exciting thought too. I think a bat-first guy like himself with the power that he provides, he can also spread it for all fields. Obviously have those pull tendencies. However, if he can dink those opposite field quite a bit, he can certainly rip those doubles as well. Carson is a guy that the more I talk about him, the more I get excited about him and the prospect of him being the top outfield prospect now for the Mets, who currently on the outfield end, it's headlined and highlighted by someone like Drew Gilbert, who is now returning, has been doing rehab stints that we know, just had a rehab outing this past day or so. I'm not sure if he played again in the minor leagues today for Port St. Lucie, but he did for certain yesterday. But Drew Gilbert, Nick Morabito, a guy who's fallen from grace big time over the past year and a half is Alex Ramirez. Ryan Clifford for corner outfield, but he profiles best as first base DH from what we're seeing thus far with that power bat. Rest assured, the Mets definitely add a huge bat to this outfield and Carson over the next couple years, hopefully. And for the Mets case, they're getting exactly a bat that they have really went away from that we have seen in recent years. They have not been the types to be drafting these bat first guys out of college, but under David Stearns and Chris Gross, we're already seeing that immediate difference and effect to have a sooner impact on the club, and that's definitely an exciting thought. Even if he is, say, a trade ship down the line for this Mets team, for the interim, certainly like how he profiles for them at the major league level, because at absolute best, I like that floor quite a bit more than Honeycutt, who not only is deemed as big swing and miss guy, but a guy that I honestly don't know if he will reach his full potential. And the Mets organization, when they're just getting everything with the groundwork done with their new front office over this past year versus a team like the Orioles, who I think are going to absolutely hit the nail on the head to a T and getting the best out of Vance Honeycutt with a great farm that they already have. Tremendous young talents. It feels like the Orioles just make the best picks every single year, and that really hasn't changed. So that's all I have to say there on Carson Benge, everybody. If I clip this where I just have it talking about Carson and I don't showcase everything on the post-game front to my replay viewers, continue to let me know your thoughts and your biggest takeaway on Carson down below in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching, to each and every one of you that are watching a replay, especially for my live viewers. We're going to continue on with the show. I may keep it up where it's combined as both post-game and this news. However, there's a decent chance I might just cut it and not show the post game to the replay viewers for the sake of this not being too long-winded of a live show. So if that's the case, thank you all so much for watching. Again, let me know your thoughts down below on Carson and his potential impact in the farm for the Mets going forward. And we'll be back at you throughout the All-Star break with a lot of trade rumor and trade update content as we build up to the trade deadline, along with a wrap-up on the MLB draft as a whole in the coming days after its conclusion on Tuesday. So everybody watching on live, we're going to continue with the live show. And my replay viewers, this is where we're going to cut things off.